فيه. بالنسبة للغرض الأساسي أو التركيز الأساسي لإدارة الأصول هو حول كيف نحوز على الموارد وكيف نوزعها وكيف نستخدمها. هذه الأسس الأساسية التي تقوم عليها إدارة الأصول. إذا أردنا أن نتحدث عن إدارة الأصول بالنسبة للمصارف فإننا نجد أنه علاوة على الأشياء التي تحدثنا عنها في جانب الأصول فإن البنوك تولي أهمية خاصة فيما يتعلق بالخصوم liabilities asset and liability management، وذلك للوضع الخاص الذي تتميز به هذه المؤسسات، حيث أن الأموال تأتيها من مصادر مختلفة من المودعين لودائع تحت الطلب لأجل معين تختلف مدده من اليوم للشهر إلى غير ذلك. إذن they pay attention to the liabilities they have. Thus لذلك فإنهم لا يكتفون بإدارة الأصول لوحدها وإنما يدمجون معها الخصوم asset and liability management، والتي يمكن أن نقول عنها أن إدارة المصرف تحاول أن تمزج بين الأصول والخصوم ورأس المال من أجل أن تحقق المنافع أو الأرباح للإنترستد جروبس للمعنيين، وهم المودعون وملاك المصارف وكذلك الهيئات الإشرافية، لأن هذه المؤسسات تخضع لإشراف ولرقابة، فلا بد عند إدارة الأصول والخصوم من قبل الإدارة أن تراعي هذه الجوانب، فتمزج بين الأسيتس واللايبيليتيز and capital من أجل كما قلنا to maximize profits، لكن دون أن يؤدي الأمر إلى تعريض المؤسسة إلى مخاطر أكبر، وخاصة المخاطر الخارجية، لأن هنالك مخاطر تشغيلية متعلقة بأي مؤسسة، لكن المخاطر المالية مثل مخاطر الانترست ريت، مخاطر الصرف وغيرها من المخاطر المالية. ما هي الأشياء الأساسية التي تركز عليها؟
He is the academic advisor of the Master Program in Financial Management in IE Business School, Madrid, and he is the Executive Director at the UBS Investment Bank for 6 years. Dr. Ignacio is an Associate Professor of Finance, Equity, Valuation, Financial Accounting, and Creative Accounting. He has been ranked Best Professor of the Master in Financial Management 2006. Dr. Ignacio is working in the Institute, the Mercia Business School, IE. He has PhD in Medieval History, MA in Law, and MSc in Economics and Business Administration and Major Finance. Dr. Ignacio is an author of the case Xfira, excuse me if I didn't read correct, What's a Fair Price? Spain fourth UMTS license, published during 2003, awarded as the best case of the year 2002-2003 by IE Dean. He is nominated to prize Ray Gini, first in economics 2005 Nobel Prize Professor Sir Aaron Clough. Please.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much to King Abdulaziz University. It's for me an honor to be addressing to you today. We are creating this platform, this Center of Islamic Economics and Finance between King Abdulaziz University and IE Business School. I'm pretty sure this center will be a key stone to promote Islamic finance within Europe and within business education. So we think we have great projects to move ahead together. Also, especially thank you for inviting me to speak about risk management after having seen that I have worked 7 years in UBS. Probably that's quite striking, taking into account what happened with UBS, that I'm going to be talking about risk management. Let me share with you my experience in UBS. The crisis started in July 2007. the CEO was sacked. And in September, a new chief financial officer came to UBS. And actually, he made a phone call, a conference call, with many fixed income people. And the question he said was, can you explain me what a CDO is? You know, UBS had $45 billion in the balance sheet in CDOs, and the CFO didn't understand what a CDO was. This tells you something. This is real history. This tells you something on the nature of the crisis, which I think should make us reflect for the future. At the end, what has happened with risk does not only impact banks. It impacts Greenspan and his policy of low rates. He was not rational doing it. It impacts this Chinese central bank. The Chinese have bought $2 trillion, honoring McNamara's sentence. The US dollar is our currency, but it is your problem, he said to the Europeans. Now the US dollar is the American forex, but it's the Chinese problem. Were the Chinese rational buying $2 trillion in government bonds? This also helped the bubble. And also talking about banks, talking about central banks, talking about financiers, everything went wrong. And sometimes everything can go wrong, which is something which should make us reflect for the future. And it went wrong partially because of the models, because models are made based on the past, not looking into the future, and models are made based on numbers. Even though models should support our decision making, it should not be the key element when you take a decision. So models are extremely dangerous, and we should be thinking about this. Questions for debate. The first question I raised is the one that the CFO raised. What is a CDO squared? Actually, the banks began to do CDOs of CDOs. It reaches a point where finance is so complicated that it just loses common sense. Once you lose common sense, the risk for a bank is huge. And I think this is a key issue because I was saying to a colleague of mine before, you know the difference between a hedge fund and a bank? The difference is a bank is a hedge fund with much more leverage. A hedge fund is using a leverage structure of 1 equity, 3 debt. A bank, Western Bank, is using 1 equity, 29 debt. This is extremely risky. This is a time bomb. And European banks are much more dangerous than US banks in terms of leverage. If you have 1 equity, 29 debt, and the minimum portion of assets, if they go wrong, the bank is bankrupt. So it is key to rethink about risk management. If you think about creating a fruit shop yourself, the fruit shop has just $100 in the assets, and you think about on the liability side having $2, $3 of equity, 97 of debt, you would say I'm crazy about starting a business like that. But the banking system works like that, and nobody had thought about that. People don't think about black swans. Had they tell you Arthur Andersen is going to disappear in the year 2000, you wouldn't believe me. Had I told you 3 years ago Lehman Brothers is going to disappear, you wouldn't believe me. But black swans do exist. People thought that all the swans were white until a black swan was discovered in New Zealand in the 19th century. So we should be thinking about strange events which could change everything. And this especially impacts banking and finance. Can we think about counterparty risk? In finance, which is the risk-free rate? Everyone would say it is the US 10-year bond. But you know that there is a credit default swap market when people can bet with the possibility that someone fails. And the credit default swap market is telling you that the probability of the US getting into bankruptcy has gone up. So it's no longer the 10-year bond, the risk-free rate. But what happens if the US just doesn't pay its debt? Who can protect you from that risk? No one will be able to honor that insurance. It's another question for debate. Which are the limits to financial deregulation? Financial deregulation was thought that let's allow risk to be spread all around the globe. And people with different appetites of risk will buy every asset. And what happened at the end is that people who were ignorant bought extremely risky assets. So we should be not regulating more the market, but having better regulation. Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, both were very regulated entities and they were bankrupt. So it's not a question of more regulation, but better regulation. And here we should begin to think whether human beings are not as rational as economy predicts. We are not an homo economicus. For instance, should we open a debate to forbid variable rate mortgages?